Creative.
Like, I can do better than that.
Inspired.
That's the cool thing about being an artist, is there are no limitations to what you want to do.
Innovative.
It's a bit of an art and a science, I suppose.
Handcrafted.
It's natural that we are here in Maine, building a product with our hands out of wood.
Accomplished.
I want to be proud of any violin that I put my name on.
Made in Maine. The people and their products that make Maine special.
Hello everyone, I'm WMTW News 8's Steve Minnick. Welcome to Made in Maine. We are inside Lisa Marie's Made in Maine store in Bath, surrounded literally by hundreds of items made right here in Maine. Over the next hour, you will meet some of the artists and craftsmen who make these products. Now, many of the products have Maine written all over them, but others you might be surprised to learn are made here in Maine. We met a woman in South Berwick who makes fine violins. Her name is Claire Curtis. As much as Claire Curtis loves to make music, given the choice, she much prefers the role of music maker.
And I wish I played better than I do. But the time that I would be spending practicing, I'm spending making instead. Now, this is way too thick. Actually, I like that.
After years of study, Claire began making her signature violins little more than a decade ago. Handcrafting each out of what seems to be nothing more than some discarded pieces of wood.
You can spend $500 or $600 just for what looks like a couple of sticks of firewood.
It's these sticks, however, tone sticks,
Now, you hear that?
which Claire says ultimately makes the difference between a good-sounding violin and a great one.
It rings, but not too much. I want a clear sound. I'm going to flip it. It's 2, so it's actually thinner on this side.
It'll take roughly 11 weeks to perfect that sound and complete the violin, meticulously scraping, measuring, and calibrating each component before they're eventually married together. What's the difference in just a mere millimeter in the sound of your violin?
Oh, incredible. In fact, 1/10 of a millimeter is going to make a huge sound difference.
But Claire is the first to admit not every one of her violins makes the grade, and she is her toughest critic. Even the slightest imperfection means the difference between a $2,000 violin and one that she sells for $10,000.
And so if I put in a label that says Claire Curtis, I made this.
There it is, right there.
I want to be proud of any violin that I put my name on.
Today, Claire Curtis is proud to tout that many musicians are in fact performing with her Made in Maine violins. But the idea that years from now those same instruments could still be making music, well, nothing, she says, could sound sweeter.
It's almost a form of immortality. With any luck, my instruments will still be bringing people music, bringing them joy well after I'm gone. And that's just amazing.
While Claire Curtis makes a relative few of her violins every year, there is a music-making company in Newport which every day pumps out hundreds of its product. Unfortunately, just a few weeks ago, renowned timpanist Vic Firth died at his home in Massachusetts, but here in Maine, his legacy lives on in Vic Firth drumsticks, made in Maine now for 52 years.
This is the way that the wood comes in from Tennessee.
It's the wood that will be carved into some 80 to 90,000 drumsticks a day. Still, this company rarely touts how many it makes. Instead, how well they're made. And inside this factory, there is little room for error.
Plus or minus 5/1000ths of an inch are our tolerances for dimensions.
It's that quality control the famed former Boston Symphony timpanist Vic Firth has adhered to from the beginning. But his simple premise remains the company's highest priority.
If you make music by whacking something, We don't want you to be limited in your ability to make your sound by not having the correct tool to use.
From that raw piece of wood to the finished product, it'll take nearly a dozen steps to ultimately realize which two drumsticks will be packaged as the perfect pair. Each stick individually weighed, measured, even eyeballed right down to the tiniest of detail to ensure they produce the exact same sound.
But we look for cross grain and knot and mildew and just the overall quality of the stick. Make sure it's up to expectations.
The higher pitch, the lower pitch.
5 decades later, the beat goes on for Vic Firth drumsticks. Today, this factory in Newport runs at full capacity, employing more than 150 workers.
You may not go buy a new drum kit in tough economic times, but you have to have sticks. So we have weathered the recession very well.
Surviving the past, preparing for the future. Chief Engineer Dave Crocker believes in order to keep this company on top, as music continues to evolve, so must the drumstick.
There's certainly a focus on what can we do that's new for the drummer, to produce a new sound, to fill an empty niche that we're not already in, which is getting harder and harder and harder to do because we probably produce 250 different shaped drumsticks.
And each of those produced one single stick at a time. Now, another item you might be surprised to learn is made here in Maine. Handmade wooden surfboards in York. Now, you think about the surfing culture, the waves, the beach, the music. Well, that is everything grain surfboards is not.
Our process is very different from any other process in the surf industry, so our shop is different.
The nearest crashing wave is miles away. Just a peaceful countryside surrounds this surf shop, aptly tucked away inside an old barn.
We're shaping boards with hand tools, you know, like people used 100 years ago.
But with those old-fashioned tools, Mike LaVecchia and his half-dozen employees are building some of the most modern, custom-made surfboards in the world. LaVecchia formed Grain back in 2005 with business partner Brad Anderson, a fellow avid surfer with an equally great passion for preserving the environment.
Our problem was we surf and we want surfboards, and we'd like to have surfboards that are, you know, more organic and less polluting, and the natural path was just to do it ourselves.
So today they're doing it themselves, creating surfboards out of wood, a process essentially abandoned back in the 1950s with the advent of fiberglass and foam. And the wood they're using, it's all locally grown, sustainable Maine cedar. Even the resins Grain applies are 40% plant-based, far less toxic than purely chemical-based ones.
So we kind of picked up where they left off, and we applied all this new thinking and new techniques and new materials and new processes to build boards that kind of, you know, meet people's requirements today.
Now, by later this summer, this workshop will be filled with not just the craftsmen, but dozens of students who come here from all over the world to learn to build surfboards. Despite the unique designs here, this company loves sharing its trade secrets.
I often say that we have the worst business plan in the world.
There's an appreciation that you get when you make your own board. You know, there's a kind of a closer connection to the board and the water.
High-tech, low impact. That's the process the guys at Grain tout set their boards apart. While their state-of-the-art science engineers the perfect ride, their method wastes little more than a few shavings.
We're all surfers, we all enjoy the outdoors, and seeing boards that are made out of kind of fairly toxic materials and that might break after 6 months and you throw them away, that's just not a great way to kind of live your life.
Still ahead on Made in Maine, more water, more wood. We'll head to Elliott for a company that makes stand-up paddle boards. And in Brunswick, a man stirring up a lot of business with his handmade wooden spoons. Welcome back to Made in Maine. You know, one water sport that has absolutely exploded over the last few years is stand-up paddle boarding. And that has led to the creation of a company in Elliott, Tidal Roots. Their workshop these days is little more than a drafty garage and cramped basement. Though still pretty small, Tidal Roots co-founders believe now is just the beginning of something big.
It's natural that we are here in Maine, building a product with our hands out of wood.
Kyle Schaefer and Kent Scoville first began building 18 months ago. Both accomplished woodworkers, it was actually their shared enthusiasm for saltwater fishing that prompted the pair to launch their line of paddle boards.
To Kent and I mean, it really hits home on the fishing side. We built our first 2 prototypes to catch striped bass in shallow water.
One of our taglines is connect to the outdoors.
And to help better make that connection, the two decided early on their boards would best be crafted from wood, not the typical foam-filled fiberglass. But even the wood they use is special. They search out northern New England for veins of reclaimed wood. In the case of these paddle boards, they're made of pine from a torn-down 250-year-old New Hampshire barn.
Instead of just tearing down these barns and letting this beautiful wood go to the wayside, we're getting our hands on it and repurposing it for our stand-up paddle boards.
Paddle boards they tout every bit as much for their unique personalities as their on-the-water performance.
We plan to kind of have every board have a story and to be able to explain that to the owner so they know what they're walking on, where the wood came from, and they can have an overall sense of pride and ownership.
It's stable enough so you can fly fish and catch.
It is, yeah, absolutely.
Once simply their passion, Kyle and Kent are now ready to make stand-up paddle their full-time profession. Their prototypes perfected, their business plan in place. The time is now, they say, for Tidal Roots to put all paddles in the water.
We're going to go live with our e-commerce site. We're going to release our 3 different models of paddle boards. Just to announce to the world that we're here to stay, and we want to make an impact on the stand-up paddleboard industry.
As we've already seen, wood is a very popular medium here in Maine, and that goes for kitchen utensils too. A man in Brunswick has opened a company right to the point. It's called Carved Wooden Spoons.
Spoons, because they're relatively easy to make.
It's that relative ease that first enticed Jason Weymouth to start making spoons a little more than 3 years ago. Back then, just a hobby, a friend suggested, why not sell them?
So I made a spoon and I put it online and it sold. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, that's neat. And so I made another one and that sold again. And so I kept doing that for a while. And then all of a sudden, I was busy.
So busy, Jason quit his corporate job, renovated his basement, and before long had carved out a whole new career.
And there's nothing like doing what you love.
And Jason simply loves working with wood. His array of designs includes spoons made from mahogany, cherry, walnut. Each spoon beginning as nothing more than a small block of lumber.
It's really unbelievable that I can make something like this so beautiful from this.
Jason likens his spoons to a piece of functional art. They're not, he says, made to just hang on the wall, but to use. If taken care of, he touts, these spoons can last generations. And though many designs are similar,
because you really don't see the wood until the oil's on it.
No 2 spoons ever look exactly the same.
Each spoon is special. The grain's different. The way they work is different from wood to wood.
By year's end, Jason's on target to sell a couple thousand spoons to customers all across the country. Each spoon individually signed, dated, and numbered. From a simple piece of wood, Jason Weymouth eyes an heirloom.
For me, it's just wonderful to transform wood into something that's going to be used in the kitchen forever.
And still ahead on Made in Maine, we'll meet a woman who left the bright lights of New York City to make her fine clothing in Maine. Also, if you're looking for yarn, we'll take you to the farm. Welcome back to Made in Maine. There's a women's clothing designer who 2 years ago left the glitz and glamour of New York City to open her shop in Biddeford. Her name is Roxy Sugar, and her company, Angel Rocks, you might say, is putting a whole new twist on women's fashions.
Always getting ready for events.
Safe to say Roxy Sugar sets her own fashion agenda. From her unconventional styles to her lifestyle move to Maine, leaving behind the glitz and glamour of fashion-crazed New York City.
If you can live a good quality life amongst good people, then I think it affects all your work and what you do.
What she's doing from inside this refurbished Biddeford mill is turning the fashion world upside down.
And this is our most versatile piece.
And inside out, up and over, around. In a word, Roxy's designs are versatile.
It's not a new concept of dressing, but it is very updated in our fabrics, in my exact shapes and forms. I do obsess over my curves and the way that they're gonna, fall around the body and flow on the body and work on the body.
And she touts that any body can wear her creations, that one size basically fits most. But how they're worn, well, that's all a matter of mood. And as Roxy's angels are here to attest, a twist here, a little hike there, and that one piece can take you just about anywhere.
We take them from, wellness to yoga, back to work, out to lunch, out to shopping, out for a cocktail event, date on the fly, no problem. Get up and do it again, also no problem. And nobody needs to be the wiser.
18 years in New York City, Roxy says since moving to Biddeford last year, she has never looked back.
Maine is amazing.
It's the people, she says, the mill space, the history of textiles here. For Angel Rocks, it all fits, no matter how you wear it.
It's a very rich history to tap into and to be a part of, and it feels that it is giving us loft and rise to have that history behind us.
Of course, a lot of folks like to make their own clothes, and often that begins with the perfect ball of yarn. Meet Kelly Corbett of Woolwich, a self-described yarn engineer.
When will they be sheared? Well, hopefully in March, but we'll see.
Any question about the source of Kelly Corbett's yarn? Well, look no further than her own backyard.
Obviously, much more than just working sheep. They're your they're my friends.
Kelly has raised virtually each of her sheep from birth. Caring for them, she says, is a job in itself, but one she has grown to cherish.
Lambs in the spring, best part. Just watching the bonds between the moms and the babies and watching them grow and seeing what I'm going to get for a fleece.
It's the natural fleece which eventually becomes the colorful yarns that Kelly sells to customers all across the country. All of her skeins of yarn are spun and cut right here in her basement, then hand-dyed upstairs on the kitchen stove.
and I layer them in.
It's the quintessential small farm operation, which Kelly believes only makes her yarns more appealing.
I think the smaller farms, people are starting to make that connection with them and how important it is that when you buy this yarn, you're not just getting an average skein of yarn, you're getting something that you can see the whole process.
From a single sheep 18 years ago, Romney Ridge has grown to include 22 sheep and a handful of goats, from which Kelly produces an array of yarns, each certified organic.
To have a product that comes from the earth turn into something like this, and then it becomes something that people are happy to have for years and years to come, and I don't know, it's really special.
But nothing, she says, is more special than getting to see a finished product.
It's probably the best part of what I do.
Her work table is littered with pictures and actual pieces from customers who've knitted from her yarn.
And she really has a lot of fleece.
Transforming that once simple strand of her sheep's fleece into a fine work of warmth.
It's kind of like my baby going off to be something grown up.
Well, still ahead on Made in Maine, meet some craftsmen who start with one ordinary object and transform it into something uniquely theirs. And don't forget, Made in Maine is always right here at your fingertips on the new WMTW mobile app. Just scroll down to the Made in Maine section and tap on your favorite feature.
From WMTW, Maine's total weather and news, this is Made in Maine.
Welcome back to Made in Maine. So what can you do with a lobster trap other than catch lobsters? Well, a man in Cape Elizabeth has found they work pretty good on bicycles too. It's the Kettle Cove Trap Basket.
I like to jokingly say it'll last. It's good to 300 feet.
When Jim Hubner loads up his gear, you can't help to notice those bike baskets look a lot like lobster traps.
It's built just like a lobster trap. I use the same tools that the lobstermen use to make their traps.
An engineer by trade, Hubner's also a part-time lobsterman with a passion for bike riding. Just sitting in traffic one day, it hit him.
I just looked and there was another guy on a bike and he had a plastic milk crate on the back of his bike, and it just like, I can do better than that.
That was nearly 2 years ago. Today, many trials and discarded traps later, Hubner believes he's perfected his basket trap design, right down to the bungees, even the bait bag for securing those smaller items.
If you're standing there looking at it, you wouldn't just, oh, that's cool, they got some bungee cord, but there's a reason for it. There's a purpose for everything on that trap.
These days, building baskets is basically just a part-time hobby. From here on the second floor of Hubner's garage, he manufactures just enough to enjoy it, selling his baskets online and to an array of bike shops across the state.
It's interesting because it's new to me, but I would like to, when I someday retire from my full-time job, I would like this keep me busy and make a little money.
Giving new use to a classic piece of proven construction.
Take the basket off. Now you can carry it like this, or you can carry it like this.
And safe to say it says Maine.
It does.
And for Hubner, it says, yes, he in fact could do better than that old milk crate. And still, when he sees one of his Kettle Cove baskets on the road.
It's hard to describe. It's just, I want to roll down the window and say, I made that. So it's really neat.
Well, like trap baskets, so often the name of a company tells you pretty much what it's all about. But not so in the case of a Biddeford company called Say It, Don't Spray It. While the owner admits the spray it part means nothing, the say it is what it's all about. When Chris Davis isn't ripping up old wood pallets, he's writing down words. Back in 2013, when he opened Say It, Don't Spray It, Davis vowed each of his works would feature two simple components.
It had to be made from reclaimed wood, and everything had to have words on it, whether it was a sign, a bottle opener, a dog leash holder. It just had to have words.
Working with reclaimed wood is a concept that dates back to his days as a graphic designer at a commercial sign company. It was all of that wasted wood.
And we used to get large signs in that had large crates, and they would just throw out the wood. So I sat there for a year and I said, what can I do with this wood?
The answer: open his own shop and create a line of home decor from discarded wood, specifically pallets, which so many companies, he says, couldn't be happier to let him haul away.
Oh, they love it because they don't know what to do with them. I mean, they have them stacked up, and they're everywhere. Businesses everywhere have them.
Back at the shop, once he's finished sawing, sanding, planing, and painting, the old junked pallet takes on a whole new life. And while Davis creates an array of decors, it's these old-fashioned wall-mounted bottle openers which he can barely build fast enough now to keep up with all the orders. Man-hours one of these.
If I were to do one, it would take about 12 minutes.
It's all pretty straightforward. Some catchy words on a slab of reclaimed wood. Words that say something to somebody. For Chris Davis, they say he's found success.
I love it. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. You know, just because I have full control over this from the time I pick the boards and cut them and sand them and get them the right way to the design. I mean, it's 100% what I do.
And of course, don't forget Maine has a lot of agriculture. This next Made in Maine product is actually grown on a farm in Cumberland, but this farm is a little different. Richard Tebow grows fodder. Today, Richard Tebow spreads a tray full of barley seeds. Once hooked to the automatic watering system, in less than a week, he'll have fully fledged fodder.
It gets fed water every 2 hours for 1 minute, and in 6 days, it's ready to go.
Ready to feed the livestock. On Tebow's farm, that's horses and alpacas, animals which in summertime graze on grass or hay, but as cold weather sets in, becomes more scarce, not to mention more expensive.
This has become something to fill that gap.
It allows me to know that I'm going to give the good nutrition, even if the hay isn't that good.
We've been cutting them into about 3 or 4 inch wafers.
Pam Hardwood owns the nearby Longwoods Alpaca Farm, one of 3 farms Tebow supplies. A regular customer this time of year, for the next 6 months, she will buy several pounds a day.
And we notice a real distinct difference from when the fodder starts versus when there's no fodder.
Day 1 doesn't show much start, and basically.
Inside Tebow's grow room, the cycle is constant, seeding and harvesting daily. Admittedly, a pretty simple process.
Anybody can do this. If I can do this, anybody can do this.
In fact, Tebow's hoping many people will do this.
Go, Ringo.
He's not out to conquer the fodder market. Instead, he'd rather teach other farmers the method. Perhaps even set up a centralized system that could benefit multiple farms at the same time.
I can't grow all of the fodder that people may need, and my recommendation is that if you want it, then you can try it. We'll start you small, but that you will benefit the most, both financially and time-wise, by doing it yourself.
A simple, homegrown, nutritious feed source, he touts, which on this Maine farm means no matter how hot or cold, wet or dry, his animals always have plenty to chew on.
That's it for this morning.
And still ahead, some Made in Maine goodies. A dessert cake whipped up by a mother-daughter team. And do you know what kombucha is? Well, it's made in just one place in Maine. Call it the sweet taste of success. A mother and her 2 daughters from Lyman have developed what they tout as the perfect cake recipe. Not too big and very easy to make. They call it Jarva cakes.
Everything you need except just a little bit of water in less than a minute.
While Jarva Cakes founder Michelle Shields touts the simplicity of her chocolate cake recipe, ask her daughters and it's simply the perfect snack.
It's that quick craving, you know, late night, perfect fix.
And at just 6 ounces, the perfect size. In fact, that's how this whole concept began. A compromise between Michelle and her cake-craving husband.
I told him, no more cakes. We're not doing that anymore. If you want something sweet after dinner, I'll make a cake in a mug for you.
Nearly 2 years later, Michelle and her crew are now making upwards of 5,000 of these cakes in a mug kits each week. And all from inside the second floor of her garage. But she loves it, she says, working from home side by side with her daughters.
It's great to have their support. It's great to know that they're excited about the product and they talk about it, they sell it, they work on social media with it.
All said, they're selling because customers find them tasty. 5 flavors of chocolate decadence. Add a little water, stir, pop it in the microwave, and 40 seconds later, you've got cake.
That's pretty good.
Pretty good?
Essentially, an old-fashioned lava cake with a touch of something special which Michelle will not divulge.
Well, it's top secret. We have a patent pending right now, so we're the only ones that know the secret to what I'm doing.
But it's no secret that Jarva Cakes is going gangbusters. 24 specialty stores now sell them. Internet orders arrive each day from all across the country.
Mix her up.
A simple mix of sweet success.
With food, if you have something good, people talk about it, they remember it. So just through word of mouth, they're selling literally like hotcakes.
And I can attest, those cakes are very good. Now, up until a few months ago, I had never heard of kombucha. Essentially, it's a fermented tea. Well, thanks to 2 guys in Portland, a lot of folks now are getting to know about kombucha.
So there's our citron latte just kicked.
Once just an old garage in Portland's industrial Bayside neighborhood.
Do you want to shoot?
Today, it's an ever-growing, popular serving spot for Maine-made kombucha.
Yeah, I'm gonna go mate and ginger.
Consume more like a tonic. You're not like drinking pints of it. You're doing maybe shots of it throughout the day. That's usually how we do it. Checking out the different tanks that are happening here.
5 years ago, Eli Kerr founded the company Urban Farm Fermentory. Together with kombucha brewer Reed Emmerich, they produced a localized blend of this age-old traditional elixir of fermented tea and sugar.
It's a bit of an art and a science, I suppose, so everybody that makes kombucha probably makes it a little bit different, just like a chef would make, you know, a certain recipe a different way.
Anywhere from balsam to white pine. Autumn olive, this was harvested right around the corner.
What mostly sets this recipe apart is the array of natural and organic flavors which are blended with the traditional tea. Blueberries, ginger, beets, chaga mushrooms, among others, all farmed or foraged locally in Maine.
Or the fun thing about it is like you can process the same ingredients a bunch of different ways and create completely different flavors. Cinnamon and basil.
Just testing to see if it'll taste any good?
Yeah, exactly.
Constantly creating, he says, always experimenting with new blends. And apparently they're catching on. Urban Farms now bottles and sells a full line of kombucha flavors throughout much of New England.
I feel like the flavor, like the palate of the American public is changing from like really sweet to drier and even more sour things, you know, so kind of lines up perfectly with where we're at.
The kombucha made here does contain about 1.5% alcohol, so legally it's sold as wine. Still loaded with probiotics, many kombucha fans tout its health benefits.
Today that will create
A modern-day twist to an old-fashioned taste. And it's attracting a crowd.
At the end of the day, we want it to be good for you, even though we can't market that, but it has to taste great.
It was really hot.
Very good. Thank you.
I know.
And still ahead on Made in Maine, you know, Maine has a lot of great artists, and some of their art is all about Maine. Plus, we'll meet an illustrator who traveled a long way to learn all about a favorite Hall of Famer from the Red Sox. While most of us think of lobstering as a profession, there is one man from Hollis who thinks of lobstering as an art. You'll just want to make sure to take a very close look at every one of Andrew Cook's lobsters.
I always start with the same basic shape of the lobster that I created, years ago.
But while Andrew Cook's lobsters may all start the same, it's a whole different picture once they're finished.
So if you're looking at it from far away, you're like lobster, but when you get up real close, you're like, wait a minute.
Upon that closer look,
This is my main course, lobster course at Lobster Valley East.
you'll find one of many dozen different designs that Cook has dreamed up over the past 4 years. From buoys to sea glass, even a map of New York City's subway system. Each of his basic lobsters eventually takes on a whimsical life of its own.
That's the cool thing about being an artist is there are no limitations to what you want to do.
While drawing is Cook's passion, there is a flip side to his creations. It's the contributions he makes to the lobster industry. Much of his work, even profits, are donated to various organizations, including the Maine Lobstermen's Association. A lifelong Mainer and consumer of lobster, it's a way to give back, he says.
I always felt like the lobstermen didn't get enough recognition for the work that they do. They don't crawl out of the ocean and onto your plate.
Safe to say, nothing says Maine like the iconic lobster and its one-of-a-kind shape you can easily spot from a good distance away. But to truly appreciate Andrew Cook's work, you'll want to move in for a much closer look.
A lot of people love lobster, but they also love something else. So to bring a unique hybrid of two things together can kind of tell a story and spark a time when they were here in Maine.
Another artist is Matt Tavares of Ogunquit. He's illustrated and written many books, several on baseball. His latest work, Growing Up Pedro, is all about Red Sox Hall of Fame pitcher Pedro Martinez. And while this is written for children, he says adults will like it as well.
Just such an amazing story to think of these two brothers. You know, and when he was a kid, Pedro was the little brother and Ramon was the big star.
It's a story Matt Tavares traveled all the way to the Dominican Republic to research. The very place these brothers, Pedro and Ramon Martinez, grew up and learned the game of baseball.
You can always find pictures of places online, but there's nothing like actually going there and getting to just soak it in.
Growing Up Pedro marks the 7th picture book on baseball Tavares has authored and illustrated since his days at Bates College. Stories about such sluggers as Ted Williams and Henry Aaron are also among those in the lineup. Baseball fan, I'm assuming.
Yep. I love to read about the history of baseball, so that's where a lot of the ideas come from.
A lifelong Red Sox fan, Tavares, like so many others, revered Pedro, the dominating pitcher. But the essence of this story dates back to well before anyone ever dreamed Martinez might one day make it to the Hall of Fame. It's the story of a skinny kid not big enough or good enough to play with the bigger boys.
It's a pretty fascinating story, I think, where he was this little kid and his big brother Ramon was the baseball star of the family, and Pedro just grew up idolizing his big brother and wishing he could be as tall as Ramon and throw as hard as Ramon. I can go back in with a lighter color.
Each of Matt's illustrations are drawn from memory or perception. They chronicle Pedro's rise from that little kid to imposing big leaguer. A true-to-life adventure that Tavares hopes just might hit some kid close to home.
He's a pretty great hero for kids to read about, because I think every kid has probably felt a little bit of that, wishing you could play with the older kids or be bigger.
In the end, Pedro proves he can indeed play with kids of any age, a final chapter that's soon to be scribed in Cooperstown. And though this book does specifically target children, Matt Tavares is pretty confident baseball fans of any age will find it a fun read.
I enjoy reading stories like this, and I think a lot of people who watched Pedro pitch would probably enjoy learning a little more about his life.
But is there anything that says Maine more than a lobster buoy? Well, still ahead, meet a man who has given lobster buoys a whole new use. It's an idea he has put out of the park.
Yeah! Finally!
Welcome back. As we said at the beginning of the show, so many Made in Maine products have Maine written all over them. And such is the case of the Bowie bat. It's made in Wells by a man they call Bowie Bill.
What you guys waiting for?
When Bill Page rounds up the kids to take some swings. All right, ready to knock it out of the park?
Take him long, that away.
You'd better believe he supplies the balls and bat. His Bowie bat, which Bill touts can make for one very fun and fair family get-together.
Yeah! Finally!
The Bowie gives you such a large sweet spot, and the ball's face friendly, so it doesn't hurt if it hits you, and it doesn't break windows. So it's a great family game.
It's an idea that dates back to 2008, when one day at the beach, Bill picked up an old beat-up Bowie and used it to whack a tennis ball. I can see taking this to the beach. And today, while the premise is the same, it's quite the production to ensure his bats are every bit as sturdy as they are the colorful, iconic Maine statement, which can have its challenges.
Well, the biggest roadblock with a lobster buoy is that they're made for fishing, not for fashion.
But make no mistake, Bill assures, these buoys are authentic. Only instead of ending up bobbing in the bay, these are designed to become bats.
I buy actual new lobster buoys from a buoy manufacturer or from a commercial marine gear store, paint them up and turn them into buoy bats. So they're the real thing. They're not something shaped like one.
It's just something about buoys. Now, in his 5th year of building these handmade bats from home, Bill says he and his wife can barely keep up with filling the demand from 250 retail stores and all the internet orders.
They're magical to people. They see them hanging on, sheds and houses, and everyone thinks they're cool, and I just happen to luck out and decide to build a product out of one.
Built for the backyard or trip to the beach, Bill says what's best about these Bowie bats, they're all about promoting fun with a stamp that is distinctively Maine.
And it feels good because I know that every time I make one of these, it's going to go to a family or a child or a person who's going to have fun with it, and that is an awesome feeling.
And boy, did we have a fun time shooting that. Well, as you've just seen, Maine has a multitude of innovative and creative craftsmen who make so many Made in Maine products all over the state. And if you'd like to see Made in Maine on a more regular basis, join us each Wednesday for WMTW News 8 at 5. Thanks for joining us for Made in Maine.